Welcome back. We're going deep on cancer research this time, specifically a metabolic approach.
Okay.
You sent over some really fascinating stuff, articles, and even an interview with a cancer researcher, Dr. Thomas Seyfried.
Yeah.
So let's dive in.
Well, it's a pretty timely deep dive, for sure. Cancer statistics, they paint a pretty grim picture. Nearly 2 million new cancer cases diagnosed each year here in the U.S., and something like 1,700 people die from cancer every day.
Wow, those are huge numbers. That's like, what, 70 people every hour?
Yeah, it's a lot.
And they're saying it's going to get even worse by 2050.
That's right.
It really makes you wonder why,
Mhm.
we put so much research, so many resources into cancer research, but why haven't we made more progress?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It makes you really question our approach. The dominant theory, the somatic mutation theory,
Right.
is just that cancer starts because of mutations in the cell's DNA. And this theory has driven most of our research and treatments like chemo, radiation, surgery.
Okay, so that's the traditional view, cancer as a genetic disease. But Dr. Seyfried, he's offering a different perspective, right? This
Right.
mitochondrial metabolic theory.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so to get us all on the same page, what are mitochondria?
Sure, so think of mitochondria as like the powerhouses of your cells.
Oh, okay.
They're the energy factories, basically. They're responsible for producing the energy that your cells need to function.
Mm-hmm.
And what Dr. Seyfried is saying is that when these mitochondria malfunction, it changes how the cells create energy. They can't use oxygen as efficiently, so they revert to a less efficient process called fermentation.
Fermentation, so like how yeast makes bread rise.
Exactly.
He's suggesting that cancer cells act like ancient organisms, kind of.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. Like those early life forms billions of years ago when there wasn't much oxygen around.
Okay, that's pretty wild. What kind of evidence is there for this? That
Yeah.
seems like a huge shift from how we normally think about cancer.
Well, there is quite a bit, actually. One of Dr. Seyfried's key findings is a direct connection between tumor growth and blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
Basically, higher blood sugar equals faster tumor growth.
That makes sense if you think about it. If the cells are relying on that,
Yeah.
that less efficient fermentation, they would need a lot of sugar to fuel that growth.
Exactly, yeah. It's like constantly adding fuel to a fire.
Right, right.
But it's not just about sugar and tumors. There's also research that challenges the whole idea that DNA mutations are the only cause.
Really?
Yeah, they found that even normal healthy tissues can contain these driver mutations, the ones that are supposed to cause cancer, but they don't actually develop the disease.
So you're saying you can have these mutations but still be healthy?
That's what the research suggests.
Wow. Okay, so that kind of throws a wrench in the traditional thinking.
It does. And there's this really fascinating experiment where researchers, they took the nucleus from a cancer cell and transplanted it into a healthy cell. And surprisingly, it didn't cause any cancerous growth. But then they took a healthy nucleus and put it into a cancer cell. And guess what? It became cancerous.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't the DNA in the nucleus that was the problem. It was something else in the cell where the mitochondria are.
Exactly. That experiment really highlighted the cytoplasm and mitochondria as being key to the whole process.
Okay, so if cancer is really a metabolic issue, then how do we approach it differently?
Well, Dr. Seyfried advocates for what he calls metabolic therapy. It aims to cut off the fuel supply to the cancer cells by restricting glucose, which comes mainly from carbs,
Mm.
and glutamine, an amino acid. Those are the two main fuels that drive cancer growth.
So basically starving the cancer cells.
In a way, yes, but you have to be selective about it.
Right.
The strategy is to restrict those fuels while also shifting the body to using ketones.
Ketones.
Yep, cancer cells can't use those efficiently.
Ketones, that's what the ketogenic diet is all about, right?
You got it.
Interesting.
And this is where Dr. Seyfried connects his theory back to our evolutionary past. For most of human history, we were in a state of nutritional ketosis.
Because carbs were scarce.
Exactly.
So we're designed to run on ketones.
Exactly.
And cancer cells can't use them effectively.
Right.
So it gives us a way to target them without harming healthy cells.
That's the idea.
That's really fascinating. So metabolic therapy is kind of like recreating that ancient metabolic state
That's what Dr. Seyfried believes, yeah?
where cancer was a lot less common.
Right.
This is starting to sound like more than just a treatment, like a way of thinking about health and prevention.
You're absolutely right.
Interesting.
Dr. Seyfried believes that lifestyle changes that promote healthy mitochondria. They're not just about treating cancer, but potentially preventing it in the first place.
Okay, I'm hooked now. What kind of lifestyle changes are we talking about?
Things like regular exercise, calorie restriction,
Mm.
intermittent fasting, and, as you mentioned, the ketogenic diet.
Right.
All of these things can help your mitochondria function better.
It sounds like a pretty big shift for a lot of people.
It can be, yeah.
But if it can help reduce the risk of cancer, it's worth considering.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of your metabolic health.
Okay, this is all very interesting in theory, but has this actually worked in real life?
There's some really compelling case studies, yeah. Remember that article you sent about the dog with the mast cell tumor?
Oh, yeah. The one whose owner stumbled upon Dr. Seyfried's work
That's the one.
and decided to, try it out. What happened with that?
Well, the vets had given the dog a pretty grim prognosis. They recommended chemo, radiation, and surgery. But the owner, she decided to try something different.
Based on Dr. Seyfried's work.
Right. She drastically cut the dog's calories, eliminated all processed food, and switched to a diet of raw chicken, fish oil, and eggs.
Wow.
Basically a canine ketogenic diet.
A total dietary overhaul. And what happened?
Well, the tumor completely vanished,
Yeah.
and the dog lived to be 15 years old.
Wow.
And it eventually died from heart disease, but the cancer never came back.
That's incredible. It shows you the potential. Obviously, one case isn't definitive proof or anything,
Of course not.
but it's pretty amazing.
It is.
And there's that other case you sent about Pablo Kelly from England, right?
Yes. Pablo Kelly.
Remind me, what was his story?
So, Pablo was diagnosed with glioblastoma,
You're right.
which is a very aggressive brain cancer. And the doctors gave him less than a year to live, even with traditional treatments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a devastating diagnosis.
So what did he do?
He also learned about Dr. Seyfried's work, and he actually decided to forego the conventional treatments
Really?
and try the metabolic approach.
Wow, that's a big decision.
It was. He got a lot of pushback from doctors and even his own family,
I bet.
but he was determined.
Wow.
He adopted a strict ketogenic diet, restricted his calories, and took some supplements to target glutamine.
Okay. And what were the results?
Well, 3 years later, he went in for a scan, and the doctors were shocked. Not only was he still alive, but the tumor had shrunk.
Really?
Yeah, enough to be operable.
It was originally inoperable.
Exactly. So they were able to surgically remove it.
And he recovered, okay.
He recovered amazingly well.
Yeah.
And for several years, Pablo continued to manage his metabolic health. He kept his glucose and ketone levels in a very specific range.
And it worked.
It did, for a while.
Now, this metabolic therapy
You're right.
and the surgery gave him years he wasn't supposed to have.
Exactly. And here's the amazing part. Pablo actually ended up having 3 separate surgeries to remove more of the tumor, all without any chemo or radiation.
That's incredible.
It is.
So, sadly, he eventually passed away from the cancer.
Actually, no. About 10 years after his diagnosis, he passed away from complications from his 3rd surgery.
Oh, wow.
It was a cerebral hemorrhage, completely unrelated to the cancer itself.
So he lived for a decade with the glioblastoma, which usually kills people within a year or two.
I know, it's remarkable.
And he died from a surgical complication, not the cancer. That really speaks volumes about this approach.
It really does. It shows that cancer can be managed, and people can live longer, healthier lives if we understand its metabolic underpinnings.
Right, and it seems like Dr. Seyfried isn't saying that conventional treatments are bad, like surgery, chemo, radiation,
No, not at all.
but that they can work better when combined with metabolic therapy.
Exactly. He acknowledges that they can be effective, especially with localized tumors, but he believes that metabolic therapy can make them even more effective.
Okay, I'm curious. How so?
Well, by weakening the cancer cells and cutting off their fuel supply, metabolic therapy can make them more vulnerable to traditional treatments, meaning you could potentially use lower doses of chemo or radiation, leading to fewer side effects.
Makes sense. Kind of like softening up the enemy before the main attack.
That's a good way to put it.
And you were saying something about combining metabolic therapy with hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yes, that's right.
Remind me, what is that?
It's where you breathe pure oxygen in a pressurized chamber.
Right.
Studies in mice have shown that combining that therapy with a ketogenic diet, it can significantly increase survival times.
Wait, so giving them more oxygen helps. I thought oxygen was essential for life.
It is. But that's where the ketogenic diet comes in. Remember how we talked about cancer cells not being able to use ketones efficiently?
Right, right.
Well, it turns out the ketones also protect healthy cells from damage. From what are called reactive oxygen species, which are produced when our bodies use oxygen.
Okay.
So the ketogenic diet acts as a shield for the healthy cells.
Gotcha.
And then the hyperbaric oxygen therapy floods the body with oxygen, including the cancer cells,
Right.
which are already weakened by the lack of glucose and glutamine. So they're much more susceptible to the damaging effects of the oxygen.
Interesting. So you're basically creating a hostile environment that the healthy cells can tolerate, but the cancer cells can't.
Exactly.
Wow.
It really highlights how understanding the metabolic side of cancer can lead to new treatments.
That's amazing. So how can people assess their own metabolic health? Is there a way to know if you're in a state that's unfavorable for cancer growth?
Yes, there is. Dr. Seyfried and his team developed the glucose ketone index,
Okay.
or GKI. It's a way to measure your metabolic health.
And how does that work?
Well, you measure your blood glucose and ketone levels, and then you divide the glucose by the ketone value.
Okay.
That number is your GKI.
And what's a healthy GKI?
A GKI of 2.0 or below is considered to be in the Paleolithic zone,
The Paleolithic zone.
meaning your metabolism is functioning similar to our ancestors.
Fascinating. So by measuring your GKI, you can see if your diet and lifestyle are creating an environment where cancer cells might struggle.
Exactly. It gives you a way to monitor and manage your own health.
Wow, that's really empowering.
It is.
It's not just about blindly following doctors' orders. It's about understanding the science and making your own choices.
Exactly. And that's a message that Dr. Seyfried is very passionate about. He believes that metabolic therapy puts the responsibility for health back on the individual.
That makes sense, but let's be realistic. There are a lot of challenges with this. Like, societal temptations are everywhere, and most doctors haven't even heard of metabolic therapy.
Yeah, those are definitely challenges. It's hard to resist all the processed food and sugary drinks out there.
Yeah.
And you're right, a lot of doctors aren't familiar with this approach, so there can be pushback from family members who don't understand it.
Right. And trying to convince a doctor who's set in the traditional view, I imagine that could be really frustrating.
It can be, yeah. Dr. Seyfried talks about how frustrating it is, that the medical community is so slow to change. Paradigm shifts are always difficult, especially when they challenge long-held beliefs and practices.
It's like that story he told about the Copernican revolution. It took centuries for people to accept that the Earth revolves around the sun, even though the evidence was clear.
Exactly. We may be seeing a similar thing with the metabolic theory of cancer.
It's a radical departure from the norm.
It is.
It'll take time for it to catch on.
It will.
But even though there are challenges, there's also a lot of hope. The research supporting metabolic therapy is growing, and we have these amazing case studies, like Pablo Kelly's.
Yeah.
It seems like we could be on the verge of a major shift in how we understand and treat cancer.
I think so too. And what's really encouraging is that this approach,
Yeah.
it gives people the power to take control of their own health and potentially reduce their risk of this horrible disease.
It's about moving beyond fear and helplessness.
Exactly.
And embracing a proactive, science-based approach
I love
to
that.
prevention and treatment.
Yes.
This has been an incredible deep dive so far. I'm already looking at cancer in a whole new light. But before we move on, I have one more question. If mitochondrial dysfunction is at the root of it all, and our modern diet and lifestyle contribute to that dysfunction, are we essentially making cancer inevitable?
That's a great question, and one that we'll definitely explore further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll talk about the implications of our modern world on mitochondrial health and what we can do to mitigate the risks.
Okay, sounds good.
Stay tuned.
All right.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Our modern world, with all the processed food and the sedentary lifestyle and all the environmental toxins, it's definitely creating an environment where mitochondria don't thrive.
So we're practically setting ourselves up for cancer by the way we live.
Well, I wouldn't say it's that simple. Not everyone who lives a modern lifestyle is going to get cancer. But the connection is there. You have to remember that mitochondria are ancient organisms. They evolved in an environment that was very different from ours today. They thrive on oxygen, movement, and real whole foods.
And our modern lifestyle is pretty much the opposite of all that.
Yeah, pretty much. We're constantly bombarded with sugar. We sit for hours on end, and we're exposed to a ton of chemicals in our food, water, even the air.
Right.
And all of that can damage our mitochondria, make them less efficient, and more likely to revert to that fermentation process that fuels cancer growth.
So we're kind of pushing them to their breaking point.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's not just about cancer either. Mitochondrial dysfunction is linked to a whole bunch of chronic diseases: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, even aging.
So it's about more than just living longer. It's about living healthier.
Exactly.
If we can support our mitochondria, we can reduce our risk for all sorts of health problems.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be about deprivation. It's about making choices that align with how our bodies were designed to function.
So, like, choosing whole foods over processed foods.
Right.
Moving our bodies regularly.
Yes.
Getting enough sleep. It's all the stuff our grandparents probably told us.
Pretty much. And minimizing exposure to toxins as much as possible. It's about recognizing that our bodies are complex systems that have evolved over millions of years. We need to treat them with respect.
So in a way, it's about getting back to basics.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Eating real food, moving our bodies, connecting with nature. It sounds simple, but in today's world, it's almost revolutionary.
It is, kind of.
I love that idea, but I gotta admit, this all feels a bit overwhelming. There's so much information out there, it's hard to know where to start.
I get it. Remember, small changes can make a big difference. You don't have to overhaul your entire life overnight.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Start with something manageable.
So what's one simple thing people can do to start supporting their mitochondria and maybe reduce the risk of cancer?
I'd say start with the GKI, the glucose ketone index.
Oh, really?
It's a simple way to measure your metabolic health and see how your choices are affecting your mitochondria.
We talked about that earlier.
Yeah, you just measure your blood sugar and ketone levels and do a simple calculation.
Right.
There are affordable meters you can use at home. So you can track your GKI and experiment with different foods and lifestyle changes. See what moves you closer to that Paleolithic zone.
That metabolic state where cancer cells can't thrive.
Exactly.
So it's like a feedback system. Exactly. You can see how your choices are affecting your health in real time.
That's the idea.
That's cool. I'm sure there are people listening who are thinking, okay, but what about genetics? What if I'm just predisposed to cancer?
Right. That's a common question.
Yeah.
And it's important to acknowledge that genetics do play a role, but they're not the whole story. Remember that analogy Dr. Seyfried used?
Oh, about.
He talked about genes being like the blueprints for a house
Oh, yeah.
and the environment being like the construction crew.
Right.
So you might have the blueprints for a really sturdy house,
Mm-hmm.
but if the construction crew cuts corners and uses bad materials, the house isn't going to be as strong as it could be.
I get it. So even if you have genes that make you more susceptible to cancer, you can still create an environment in your body that makes it less likely to develop.
Exactly. That's where metabolic health comes in. By supporting your mitochondria, you're creating a cellular environment that's less hospitable to cancer, regardless of your genes.
It's like stacking the deck in your favor.
I like that.
You can't control your genes, but you can control the environment they operate in.
Exactly. And remember, we're talking about complex systems here. It's not just about one gene or one lifestyle choice. It's about the cumulative effect of all your choices over time.
So small, consistent changes add up.
They do.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
And it's never too late to start making those changes.
That's right.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. If someone wants to learn more about Dr. Seyfried's work, where should they start?
Well, he wrote a book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease.
Mhm.
It goes into a lot of detail about his research.
Okay.
It can be a bit dense, but it's a great resource.
And for people who prefer something a little easier to digest, the interview you sent was really good.
Yeah, I thought so too.
He explained everything really clearly.
He did.
And there are tons of resources online, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. His website, lectures, interviews.
It's clear that he's very passionate about this topic.
He is.
What was it about his perspective that struck you the most?
Honestly, I was really impressed by his belief in the power of science and his dedication to helping people with cancer.
He's not just a researcher, he's an advocate.
Exactly.
He wants to see this knowledge actually help people.
That's what I found so inspiring.
It reminds us that science isn't just about facts and figures, it's about human connection and compassion.
It is.
And finding solutions to real-world problems.
Absolutely.
So this metabolic approach isn't just about changing your diet or taking supplements.
Right.
It's about a whole shift in mindset.
It is.
It's about taking ownership of your health.
Yes.
And making informed choices.
I love that.
It's so empowering.
It really is.
Especially in a world where we often feel powerless when it comes to health issues.
Yeah, it's easy to feel that way.
Metabolic therapy gives you a sense of hope and agency.
I agree.
It's about recognizing that we have more control than we think.
We do.
It's not about guarantees or miracle cures, but about making choices that can improve our odds. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but before we move on to the final part, I want to go back to something Dr. Seyfried said that really stuck with me. He talked about how success with metabolic therapy really depends on the individual.
Yeah.
It's not something that's done to you, it's something you actively participate in.
That's so important.
It requires commitment, discipline, a willingness to think differently about health.
And it's not always easy,
Yeah,
especially with all the temptations around us.
right. It's about playing the long game,
Yes.
making choices that support your future self.
Exactly.
And finding support is important too.
It is.
Connecting with people who share your values and goals, that can make a big difference.
It really can.
This whole conversation has really changed my perspective on cancer. It's not just about bad luck or genes. It's about the choices we make and the environment we create within our bodies.
I think that's a really powerful way to look at it.
It's about recognizing that connection between our genes, our lifestyle, and our environment,
Right.
and realizing that we have more influence than we think.
Absolutely.
It's both humbling and empowering.
I agree.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's talk about some practical steps and tools that we can use to actually put all of this into practice. It's amazing how this whole conversation about Dr. Seyfried and metabolic therapy has really shown how we tend to think about health reactively, not proactively.
That's true. Yeah. We wait till something goes wrong and then we try to fix it.
Exactly. Like health is something separate, something we just deal with when it breaks down instead of something we actively cultivate.
Yeah, it's like we forget that we have some control over it.
But what I find exciting about metabolic therapy is it flips that whole script.
Right.
It's about taking ownership, understanding what impacts your health,
Yeah.
and then making choices that support your body's own ability to heal.
It's about being proactive.
Exactly. Becoming an active participant, not a passive patient.
I love that.
It's not about denying genetics or rejecting conventional medicine either. It's just recognizing that we have more power than we think.
We do. Way more.
It's really empowering. But honestly, it can also feel a bit overwhelming. There's so much information, so many things you could change. Where do you even begin?
You're right. It's a lot to process. I think the key is to start small. Don't try to do everything at once. Pick one or two things you can realistically change in your daily routine.
Okay, keep it simple. What are some practical first steps?
Well, we've talked about diet a lot. Reducing processed foods and sugary drinks is huge. Focus on whole foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, lean protein. That alone can make a significant difference.
And what about exercise? How does that fit in?
Exercise is so important for mitochondrial health. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. Just find something you enjoy and can stick with. Walking, dancing, swimming, whatever works for you. Even short bursts of activity throughout the day can help.
Dr. Seyfried also mentioned fasting.
Yes, fasting can be very powerful. But it's important to be careful with it, especially if you have any health conditions. Definitely talk to your doctor before making any big changes to your eating patterns.
Good advice. Always best to check with your doctor before trying anything drastic. What about supplements? Are there any that can support mitochondrial function?
There are a few that show promise, but do your research and make sure you're getting high-quality products.
Right, supplements should be supplemental, not a replacement for a healthy lifestyle.
Exactly.
But even with all this information, it still takes a lot of commitment to make these changes and stick with them.
It does.
How do you stay motivated, especially in a world that's constantly tempting us with quick fixes and instant gratification?
It's all about changing your mindset. Focus on the long-term benefits. Imagine yourself living a long, healthy, vibrant life. Every healthy choice you make is an investment in your future well-being.
Playing the long game with your health.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the importance of support. Connect with people who share your values and goals. Join a community, find a mentor, or talk to supportive friends and family. Having that encouragement can make a world of difference.
That's so true. You know, this whole deep dive has completely changed how I think about cancer. It's not just about bad luck or genes. It's about the choices we make, the environment we create within our own bodies.
It is, yeah. It's about understanding that connection between our genes, our lifestyle, and our environment.
And realizing that we have more influence over that connection than we think.
Absolutely.
It's both humbling and empowering at the same time.
It really is.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into the world of metabolic therapy and its potential to prevent and treat cancer. This is clearly a complex and evolving field, but the research is exciting.
It is.
And the stories we've heard are truly inspiring.
They are.
We encourage you to check out the resources we mentioned and learn more about this fascinating approach to health. Remember, knowledge is power.
That's right.
And the more we understand our bodies, the better choices we can make. Before we go, I want to leave you with a question to think about. If you could make one small change today to support your metabolic health, what would it be? And how would that change create a ripple effect, leading to a healthier future for you and your loved ones? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into metabolic therapy.